Emma stood in the center of her small, empty home, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of cold tea. The walls echoed with silence, every creak of the floorboards reminding her that she was alone. Sunlight slipped through dusty curtains, painting streaks of gold across the faded carpet, but it did nothing to warm the emptiness she felt. On the mantel sat a few framed photographs, smiles frozen in time, laughter that would never return. Her husband's chair was still pulled out slightly from the table, as if he had just stepped away and would come back any moment. But he never did. Emma's eyes lingered on the window, staring at the mountains in the distance, their wild peaks dark and untamed, wondering if somewhere out there, life still had surprises left for her. And that's when she first heard about him, the wild man of the mountains, and a strange, unsettling hope stirred deep inside her. Emma's gaze drifted to the small collection of her late husband's belongings, neatly arranged on a wooden shelf and a worn dresser. There was his favorite leather jacket, soft and creased from years of use, still carrying the faint scent of his cologne. A pair of boots sat side by side, their laces frayed, as if waiting for feet that would never slip into them again. She picked up a brass pocket watch, its surface warm from years of handling, and ran her fingers over the engraved initials, reminders of the man who had once filled every corner of her life. Each item whispered memories, the sound of his laughter echoing through the hall, the smell of morning coffee he always spilled on the kitchen counter, the gentle way he would brush a stray hair from her face. Her eyes welled with tears, but she didn't move. It was as if touching these objects kept a fragile thread connecting her to him, a thread that now trembled at the thought of the wild stranger who was about to enter her life. She had spent every night alone since he died, the silence of the house pressing in around her like a heavy, unshakable shadow. Each creak of the floorboards, each gust of wind rattling the windows, reminded her of the empty space he once filled. Meals went uneaten, laughter was forgotten, and the world outside seemed distant, muted, as if it had moved on without her. Then, one afternoon, a whisper of a story reached her ears, about a man who lived deep in the mountains, untamed and fierce, a soul untouched by the world. Curiosity prickled at her heart, sharper than fear, and when she finally caught sight of him, standing tall against the rugged peaks, something stirred inside her, a strange mix of awe, hope, and an unspoken connection she couldn't yet name. The wild man in the mountains had arrived, and with him came a possibility she had long thought lost. The town hall buzzed with uneasy excitement, the wooden floorboards creaking under the weight of curious villagers. Emma stepped inside, her heart pounding, unsure if she belonged among the crowd murmuring about the wild man they called untamable. At the front, a rough-looking man displayed him like a prize, his hair tangled, clothes torn from years in the wilderness. "No one's managed to keep him," the auctioneer warned, his voice carrying over the room. "He's too wild, too unpredictable." Whispers spread like wildfire, and the villagers exchanged worried glances. Emma's stomach twisted, part fear, part fascination. Yet, something in her stirred, a reckless hope she didn't understand. Against her better judgment, she raised her hand and placed her bid. The room went quiet, all eyes on her. She had just bought the wild man of the mountains, and with that, her life was about to change forever. As she watched him stand there, silent and rugged, something about him tugged at a memory she couldn't quite place. His movements, subtle, almost instinctive, reminded her of someone she once knew, though it made no sense. How could a stranger, raised in the wild, echo the gestures of the man she had lost? A shiver ran down her spine, and her heart beat faster with a mix of fear and curiosity. She stepped closer, studying the angles of his face, the intensity in his eyes, and the faint, familiar way he shifted his weight. It was as if the mountains had delivered a ghost from her past, one that whispered of secrets she wasn't yet ready to hear. And in that moment, Emma realized she had more questions than answers, and that her life, long stagnant, was about to unravel in ways she could never imagine. He emerged from the shadowed forest like a figure carved from the mountains themselves, rugged, silent, and impossibly strong. His clothes were worn and dust-streaked, his hair tangled from years of solitude, yet his presence carried an unspoken authority. Every movement was deliberate, almost ghost-like, as if he belonged more to the wilderness than to the world of villagers and cabins. His eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to look straight into Emma's soul, reading her grief, her longing, and her fear with an unsettling clarity. Though he spoke little, the air around him was charged with tension and mystery, and the villagers' warnings echoed in her mind. No one can tame him. He's too wild. Yet, as Emma watched him approach, a strange familiarity tugged at her heart, a whisper of memories she couldn't yet place, as if the mountains themselves had sent this wild man to change her life forever. He arrived at Emma's doorstep as the sun dipped behind the jagged mountains, casting long shadows across the dusty trail. Every step he took seemed measured, deliberate, as if the world itself paused to make way for him. His clothes were worn and weathered, patched countless times, carrying the scent of pine, earth, and wind. His hair fell in tangled strands across his forehead, and a faint stubble shadowed his jaw, giving him a rugged, almost untouchable presence. He didn't speak, only lifted his dark, piercing eyes to meet hers for a fleeting moment, silent, unreadable, and yet strangely familiar. For a heartbeat, Emma thought he was more ghost than man, a figure pulled from the mountains themselves, carrying secrets and storms within him. The air between them felt heavy, charged, as if some unspoken understanding had already begun to form. The villagers huddled in small groups near the edge of town, their whispers carrying like wind through the streets. "No one can tame him," one woman muttered, clutching her shawl as if the words themselves could ward off danger. "He's too wild," an older man added, shaking his head with a mixture of fear and awe. Tales of his life in the mountains had grown into legend, how he survived blizzards alone, tracked game for weeks, and vanished for days without a trace. Children were warned never to wander near the forest paths he favored, and even the bravest men spoke his name in hushed tones. Some claimed he had the eyes of a predator, others that he moved like a shadow, silent and unpredictable. Emma listened from the corner of the market, a chill running down her spine. Despite their fear, a strange pull tugged at her heart. Why did the stories about him feel so alive? And why did her heart beat faster when she thought of him? Emma tried again and again to break through the silence that surrounded him, her voice soft, patient, almost pleading. "Can you tell me your name?" she asked, her eyes searching his for any flicker of recognition. He only tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. Words seemed to stick in his throat, and the forest of thoughts behind his dark eyes remained hidden. Sometimes he would grunt or shake his head, but mostly he just moved with quiet, deliberate gestures, pouring water, stacking firewood, or tending to the animals, as if actions alone could speak the language of his world. Emma felt a strange mixture of frustration and awe. Every silent glance, every careful movement, hinted at a story he wasn't ready to tell. And yet, despite the distance he kept, she felt a pull she couldn't explain, a whisper of familiarity that refused to be ignored. Sometimes, when the evening settled into a quiet hush, she would hear him humming a soft, haunting melody while he worked. At first, she thought it was a trick of her mind, a fragment of memory stirring in the shadows of the room. But then the notes became unmistakable, the same tune her husband used to whistle in the mornings, the one that had always made her heart lift even on the darkest days. Emma froze, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her breath caught in her throat. How could a stranger, a man who had lived untamed in the mountains, know this song? Each hum carried the weight of the past, brushing against her grief like a ghost she had longed to touch. A chill ran down her spine, mingled with a spark of hope and fear. Who was he really? And why did he echo the man she had lost so dearly? Emma felt a strange unease settle over her whenever she was near him, like standing too close to a storm she couldn't predict. His silence, his wildness, and the untamed energy he carried made her heart pound with both fear and fascination. Yet, despite the tension that prickled at her skin, she couldn't tear her eyes away. There was something about him, something raw, untamed, and yet strangely familiar, that tugged at her curiosity. Every glance, every small movement seemed loaded with meaning she couldn't fully grasp. She felt drawn to him in ways that frightened her, a mixture of longing and caution twisting inside her. It was as if the mountains themselves had delivered him to her doorstep, for a reason she didn't yet understand, and she couldn't decide if that reason would bring danger or a miracle. Emma stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest, as a thought she dared not speak took root. Could it be possible that her husband had somehow sent him? The idea was absurd, impossible even, yet the way the mountain man moved, the melodies he hummed, and the faint gestures she recognized made her question everything she thought she knew about loss and fate. Her mind spun with memories of her husband's words, his secret habits, even the quiet glances they shared that no one else could understand. And now, here was this stranger, echoing them all, as if he had been plucked from her memories and placed into the world. Emma shivered, torn between hope and disbelief. Was it coincidence, or was something far greater at work, a hand guiding her grief toward a chance she didn't even know she wanted? The mountains seemed to hold the answer, and yet they offered nothing but silence. Over the days that followed, Emma began to notice the small, almost imperceptible habits that made her heart ache with recognition. The way he leaned against the doorway before stepping into a room, the gentle tilt of his head when he listened, even the careful way he poured water into a cup, all mirrored the movements of her late husband. Sometimes he would pause in thought and run a hand through his hair just the way her husband used to, or whistle quietly while working, a tune so familiar it made her stomach tighten. At first she tried to dismiss it, telling herself it was only her imagination, a trick of grief-seeking comfort, but the habits were consistent, undeniable, each one threading a connection she couldn't explain. With every gesture, she felt the past brush against the present, leaving her torn between longing for what was lost and a cautious hope that life had somehow brought him back in another form. Emma watched him closely, captivated by the way he moved through the small tasks of the house with a precision and care that seemed almost familiar. He repaired a broken chair with steady hands, each hammer strike echoing a rhythm she recognized from long ago. When he walked across the room, there was a certain grace in his steps, a gentle confidence that reminded her of her husband's quiet strength. And then there was the smile, rare, fleeting, but warm enough to make her chest tighten, carrying the echo of shared jokes and tender moments she had thought lost forever. Sometimes, when he thought no one was listening, he let out a low whistle, a tune so distinct it could only belong to her husband, as if the mountains had taught him this secret language of their past. Each gesture, each subtle action drew her closer, blurring the line between memory and reality, leaving her to wonder how one man could carry the essence of another so completely. Days passed in quiet rhythm, and Emma found herself drawn to the simple, unspoken routines of the mountain man. She watched him chop wood in the crisp morning air, each swing of the axe precise and strong, the splintering logs scattering across the yard. Later, he moved among the animals with surprising gentleness, feeding the chickens, brushing the horses, and murmuring soft, low sounds she couldn't quite understand. Emma stayed at a distance, leaning against the doorway or the fence, her heart both anxious and captivated. She noticed the care in his movements, the patience in his hands, the way he seemed to exist entirely in the moment, yet aware of her presence. There was a quiet poetry in his solitary life, a kind of untamed grace that made her pulse quicken and her chest ache with emotions she hadn't felt in years. And though he rarely spoke, each small action told her something she could neither name nor fully comprehend, yet felt in the deepest part of her heart. Emma's days were a tangle of conflicting emotions, each one pressing heavily against her chest. Grief weighed her down like a stone, a constant reminder of the life she had lost and the husband who would never return. Guilt gnawed at her quietly, guilt for moving forward, for feeling curiosity or hope in the presence of a stranger who somehow echoed him. And yet, she couldn't deny the pull of curiosity that grew stronger with every glance, every subtle gesture he made. Who was this man, really? How could he carry fragments of her husband in such uncanny ways? Her heart raced with questions she dared not speak aloud, and nights were spent staring at the ceiling, imagining what fate had brought to her door. The tension twisted inside her, bitter and sweet, leaving her suspended between longing and fear, hope and disbelief. She knew that soon something would shift, something that could either heal her or shatter her entirely. One afternoon, while Emma was carrying a heavy basket of firewood across the yard, she tripped over a loose stone, sending the basket tumbling and splintering wood in every direction. Before she could even cry out, strong hands gripped her shoulders, steadying her with a force that was firm yet gentle. She looked up and saw his dark eyes locked on hers, a calm intensity there that left her breathless. "Are you all right?" he asked in a voice low and rough, but filled with unexpected warmth. Emma's heart raced, not just from the fall, but from the shock of such immediate, selfless care. For a moment, she saw the wildness in him soften, replaced by a protective tenderness that made her chest ache. It was as if, in that instant, he became more than the untamed stranger she had purchased. He became a presence she could rely on, a quiet anchor in the storm of her grief and fear. As Emma bent to gather the scattered pieces of wood, a soft, almost inaudible whisper drifted through the air, words that made her stop in her tracks. Her hands froze mid-motion, and her breath caught in her throat. It was a phrase her husband had spoken countless times, a small, private saying that no one else had ever known. Her heart raced, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a fragile hope she barely dared to feel. Could it really be him, or was her mind playing tricks, conjuring memories in the shadow of grief? She lifted her eyes slowly, and for a fleeting moment, their gazes met. The wild man's expression was calm, unreadable, yet something in the depth of his eyes stirred a recognition she could not explain. Emma's pulse thundered in her ears. Had fate sent this stranger, or had her husband somehow found a way to reach her across the impossible? Emma couldn't shake the questions that gnawed at her mind, and curiosity pushed her forward despite the unease curling in her stomach. She watched him quietly, noting the way he moved, how he seemed at ease with the wilderness, as if the mountains themselves had taught him every instinct. She asked the villagers in hushed tones, listening to their half-whispered tales of a man who had lived alone for years, surviving storms, hunting in silence, and rarely speaking to anyone. Some said he was untamable, others called him a ghost of the mountains, a mystery no one had ever solved. Yet, when Emma looked at him, she sensed there was more, traces of a life unspoken, memories hidden behind dark, piercing eyes. The puzzle gnawed at her, blending fear with fascination, and a thought kept returning. What if understanding his past could unlock the secrets of her own heart, and perhaps even bring back something she had thought lost forever? In the evenings, the villagers gathered around the fire, speaking in hushed tones about the man who had come down from the mountains. They told stories of a recluse who had lived alone for years, surviving bitter winters and howling storms with nothing but his own wits and the wilderness around him. Some said he had been abandoned as a boy, others that he had chosen solitude to escape a past no one could imagine. They described him as silent and watchful, moving like a shadow through the forests, with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Few had ever approached him, and those who did spoke of a quiet intensity, a presence that could unsettle the bravest hearts. Emma listened carefully, feeling a shiver run down her spine. Each story seemed to pull her closer to understanding him. Yet the mystery only deepened. What had shaped this wild man, and why did he carry echoes of someone she had loved and lost? At night, Emma's dreams became a tangled web of past and present, memories of her husband weaving themselves around the rugged presence of the mountain man. She would see her husband smile, hear his laughter echoing through the halls of her mind, only to watch the stranger's shadowed figure step into the same spaces, moving with the same quiet grace. Sometimes she awoke with a start, heart racing, unsure if what she had seen was real or imagined. The mountain man's silhouette would appear in the corners of her room, or she would hear his soft whistle, the tune unmistakably her husband's, threading through her dreams like a lifeline. Fear and longing collided, leaving her shaken yet unable to turn away from the connection that had begun to root itself deep within her. Each nightmare blurred the line between memory and reality, and she wondered whether fate was toying with her, or if the mountains had truly returned a fragment of her lost love. Day by day, Emma became painfully aware of the uncanny similarities between the mountain man and her late husband. The way he tilted his head when listening, the quiet sigh he let out when frustrated, even the subtle shrug of his shoulders, all mirrored gestures she thought belonged only to her husband. At times he muttered short phrases or hummed little tunes, words and melodies she hadn't heard anyone else speak in years, secrets that had been theirs alone. her heart twisted with a mix of longing, disbelief, and hope she barely dared to feel. Each shared trait was like a thread connecting her grief to the present, a whisper of familiarity in a stranger's untamed form. She found herself watching him more closely, craving the smallest sign that this wild, silent man carried pieces of the man she had loved. And perhaps that fate had delivered him for a reason she could not yet comprehend. With every glance, every quiet gesture, Emma's heart became a battlefield of hope and doubt. Did he really know her husband, or was her mind weaving threads of memory into the life of a stranger? Each time he hummed a familiar tune or used a phrase she thought only her husband had ever spoken, her pulse quickened and a shiver ran down her spine. Yet, the uncertainty gnawed at her. What if it was just coincidence, some cruel trick of fate teasing her grief? She watched him across the yard, chopping wood, feeding the animals, and felt both drawn to him and terrified of what her longing might be doing to her mind. The line between reality and memory blurred, leaving her trapped between disbelief and a fragile hope she barely dared to acknowledge. Every quiet moment with him became charged with questions she couldn't answer, and a growing sense that her life was about to pivot in a direction she could never have predicted. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Emma stood near the doorway, quietly observing him as he worked. Then, in a low, almost breathless whisper, he spoke a phrase so familiar it made her blood run cold, a phrase her husband had spoken only to her, a secret so intimate it had lived in her heart alone. She froze, her hands gripping the wooden frame for support, unable to move or speak. The words hung in the air like a ghost, carrying with them memories, love, and a pang of disbelief that clawed at her chest. Her mind raced. How could this stranger know what no one else did? Was it possible that fate had brought him to her? Or was this some impossible miracle? The mountains outside seemed to hold their breath, and for a heartbeat, the world felt suspended, leaving Emma teetering between hope and a disbelief so sharp it hurt. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Emma stepped closer, her voice trembling yet firm. How do you know that?" she asked, her eyes searching his face for any flicker of recognition or truth. The mountain man remained still, his dark eyes locked on hers, calm and unreadable, as if he weighed every word she spoke before deciding whether to respond. Emma's chest tightened, a mix of frustration, fear, and longing rising in her throat. She wanted answers, a reason, anything that could make sense of the impossible connection she felt. Yet, he said nothing at first, letting silence stretch between them like a taut wire. And in that charged stillness, she realized just how fragile her heart had become, pulled between grief for the man she had lost and an unexplainable hope that maybe, somehow, fate had brought a fragment of him back into her life. He stayed silent, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made Emma's heart pound in her chest. Every flicker of emotion in his dark eyes seemed deliberate, measured, as if he were weighing not just her words, but the very thoughts she dared not speak aloud. The air between them felt thick, heavy with unspoken truths, memories, and questions that hung like fragile threads, ready to snap. Emma searched his face for any sign, confession, recognition, even a hint of the man she thought she had lost, but found only a stillness that both terrified and captivated her. In that silence, she felt the weight of her grief, her longing, and the inexplicable pull toward him all at once. It was as if the mountains had placed him before her, not merely as a stranger, but as a keeper of secrets she was only beginning to glimpse. Emma's mind became a canvas where past and present merged in startling clarity. She saw her husband's gentle smile as he tied her shoelaces, the familiar way he would hum a tune while repairing a fence, even the soft, reassuring brush of his hand on her shoulder. And then, like a living echo, the mountain man mirrored each motion, his rugged hands working with surprising tenderness, his quiet whistle carrying the exact melody she had thought lost forever. Even the tilt of his head, the way his eyes softened in moments of thought, mirrored the gestures she remembered so vividly. Each act pulled at her heart, blurring the lines between grief and hope, memory and reality. Emma could barely breathe, caught in the impossible sensation that her husband's essence had somehow been carried forward in this wild, untamed stranger. The past was alive again, but she didn't know whether to fear it or embrace it, and that uncertainty made her heart ache with longing she could no longer deny. As the days stretched on, Emma's mind spun with possibilities, each more bewildering than the last. Could it be that this rugged, silent man was her husband's long-lost twin, separated at birth and shaped by the wild mountains into a mirror of the man she loved? Or perhaps someone had trained him in secret, teaching him the private gestures, melodies, and phrases her husband had used, all to guide her through grief and loneliness. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, a puzzle she could not yet solve. Each glance, each familiar motion, and each whispered tune fed her hope, even as doubt clawed at her heart. She wanted answers, but the mountain man remained silent, watching, waiting, as if he knew that revelation, when it came, would change everything, and that she might not be ready to handle it. The uncertainty hung between them, thick and heavy, like the mist that rolled down from the mountains at dawn, hiding truths she yearned to uncover. Emma's heart was a storm of conflicting emotions, each one crashing against the other with relentless force. Grief clawed at her chest, raw and unyielding, a reminder of the husband she had lost and the life she had once known. Anger flickered beneath the surface, anger at fate, at the wild man who carried echoes of someone she loved, and at herself for feeling drawn to him when she should have been mourning. And yet, beneath the grief and frustration, hope began to stir, fragile and trembling, like the first light of dawn filtering through the mountains. Every familiar gesture, every whispered phrase, every subtle habit he displayed, stirred that hope, making her heart ache with a longing she barely understood. She was caught in a whirlwind of emotions, unsure how to navigate the pull between memory and reality, fear and desire, loss and the faint, tantalizing promise that perhaps, somehow, life had granted her a second chance. The air in the small cabin was thick with tension as Emma watched him move quietly across the room, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, suddenly he spoke, a full sentence, clear and deliberate, uttered in the exact cadence of her husband's voice, a phrase she had not heard in years. The words hung in the air like a fragile bridge between past and present, carrying with them memories, love, and a shock that made her knees weak. Emma froze, unable to breathe, her mind spinning with disbelief. How could he know that? How could this wild man, untamed and silent for so long, carry the voice of the man she had lost? The mountains outside seemed to hold their breath, and for a heartbeat, time itself paused, leaving Emma suspended in a whirlwind of shock, hope, and a longing she could no longer contain. The sky had darkened with an unexpected storm, and Emma was struggling to herd the frightened animals back into the barn when a bolt of lightning struck nearby, sending a cascade of falling branches toward her. Panic surged through her as she stumbled, heart racing, unable to escape the sudden danger. In an instant, the mountain man appeared, moving with a speed and precision that seemed almost supernatural. He grabbed her arm, pulling her to safety, just as the heavy timber crashed to the ground where she had stood moments before. Emma's chest heaved, shock and gratitude flooding her senses, her eyes wide as she tried to comprehend the force and care in his actions. For the first time, she saw the full measure of his strength, his instinctive protection, and the deep, unspoken connection that had been forming between them. In that moment, fear turned into awe, and her heart, long heavy with grief, beat with a fragile, daring hope that perhaps fate had truly placed him in her life for a reason she was only beginning to understand. As the storm raged around them, Emma clutched his arm, still trembling from the near disaster, when he finally spoke, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. The words he shared pierced through the roar of wind and rain, revealing a truth so shocking it made her chest tighten and tears well in her eyes. He told her that he had been trained in secret by someone who had loved her husband dearly, learning every habit, every phrase, every small gesture, so that if tragedy ever struck, she would not be left entirely alone. The revelation hit Emma like a tidal wave. Astonishment, relief, and a strange, tender joy mingled together, leaving her breathless. In that moment, the wild, untamed man before her was no longer just a stranger. He was a guardian, a living echo of the man she had lost, sent to bridge the gap between grief and hope. The mountains outside howled, but inside her heart, a warmth bloomed, fragile yet undeniable, as if life itself had orchestrated a second chance for love, memory, and healing. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, as the fire crackled and the mountain man moved silently around the cabin, Emma felt a profound shift within herself. She realized how her grief and loneliness had blinded her to the miracles life still held, the small wonders, the unexpected kindness, the way the world could surprise her even when she thought all hope was lost. For years, she had lived in the shadow of sorrow, carrying only memories of what had been and what could never return. Now, in the presence of this wild, mysterious man, who somehow carried pieces of her husband's soul, she began to understand that life could offer second chances in forms she had never imagined. Her heart, once heavy and closed, started to open, and with it came a sense of gratitude, awe, and the delicate thrill of hope. For the first time in years, Emma felt that the world still held magic, and that she was ready to embrace it. Tears slid silently down Emma's cheeks as she sat by the warm glow of the fire, a mixture of relief and acceptance washing over her like a gentle tide. Years of grief, guilt, and longing seemed to ease, replaced by the quiet acknowledgement that life had not abandoned her entirely. The mountain man moved around the cabin with calm purpose, and each small gesture, the way he stacked firewood, the soft hum of a tune she knew, the protective glances he cast her way, filled her with a deep, soothing reassurance. She let herself breathe, fully and freely, allowing the raw ache of her past to mingle with the fragile joy of the present. Acceptance came slowly, but with it came peace, a quiet certainty that, while the loss of her husband could never be undone, the universe had found a way to remind her that love, connection, and miracles could still exist, even in the most unexpected forms. As she watched him move quietly around the cabin, humming a familiar tune and tending to the smallest details with care, a sudden clarity washed over Emma. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, the uncanny gestures, the whispered phrases, the ways he mirrored her husband so perfectly. She finally understood why fate had brought him into her life, not to replace what she had lost, but to guide her through the shadows of grief, to show her that love and connection could still bloom in the most unexpected ways. Her chest tightened with a mix of awe, relief, and an almost trembling joy. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were different now. Tears of understanding, of hope, of a heart opening again. In that moment, she realized that life's miracles were not always grand or obvious. Sometimes they arrived quietly, in the form of a rugged, silent stranger who carried pieces of the past to light a new path forward. Days turned into weeks, and Emma and the mountain man settled into a quiet, harmonious rhythm together. Mornings were soft and golden, filled with the gentle sounds of the cabin waking, the hiss of the kettle, the creak of floorboards, the rhythmic chopping of wood outside. He moved with careful precision, tending to the animals, repairing what needed fixing, and always, in the smallest gestures, showing a patience and thoughtfulness that warmed her heart. Emma, in turn, began to let herself live again, cooking, laughing quietly at small moments, and sharing the space without fear or hesitation. Words were still sparse, but the connection between them spoke volumes. The silent understanding, the mirrored glances, the way they could be in the same room without needing to fill it with conversation. Each day the shadow of her grief softened, replaced by a gentle, steady hope. In the quiet of the mountains, surrounded by the simple, unspoken companionship of the man who had somehow bridged the past and present, Emma found peace, love, and the realization that life could surprise her with miracles she had once thought impossible. Emma learned that love doesn't always arrive in the way we expect. It can take the form of a rugged stranger from the mountains, a quiet guardian who carries echoes of the past, or a presence that seems impossible yet profoundly real. Healing often comes in strange packages, disguised as something wild, silent, or untamed, and it asks only that we open our hearts to the unexpected. Life doesn't always follow the rules of logic or reason, but the heart recognizes truth in ways the mind cannot comprehend. Through grief, loss, and disbelief, Emma discovered that hope can bloom in the most unlikely places, and that miracles, subtle, quiet, and heart-stirring, can arrive when we least expect them. In the embrace of this new life, she understood that love, in all its mysterious forms, has the power to heal, transform, and illuminate paths we never thought possible. She thought she had lost him forever, the man who had filled her days with love, laughter, and quiet understanding. The ache of absence had carved deep hollows in her heart, leaving her world shadowed by grief. And yet, somehow, against all odds, life had found a way to whisper him back, through the rugged stranger who carried fragments of her husband's essence, through the familiar gestures, the secret melodies, and the quiet acts of care that bridged past and present. Standing in the soft glow of the cabin, watching him move with gentle purpose, Emma felt a surge of wonder, awe, and delicate joy. It was a reminder that love is never truly lost. It can return in forms unexpected, strange, and miraculous, touching the heart in ways we can scarcely imagine. In that moment, she understood that life's whispers, soft, mysterious, and enduring, sometimes bring us back exactly what we thought gone forever.